All right, so today we have here with us Eden Feuer, who's the director of the college workshop and has graciously agreed to run a seminar slash workshop with students here to help you guys with the topic of college essays. Writing is not taught in schools, but in Uzbekistan, it's not taught period. Like not only
Okay.
is writing not taught in the sense of a personal statement, but like even academic writing is not really a subject that is part of the curriculum. So a lot of students applying from Uzbekistan find this part of the application really difficult to turn into a strength. I think most people at best will write an essay that is just like doesn't hurt their chances of getting in. But I think
Right.
what would be really helpful is to help these students who are all applying this year to with some tips about how to turn their essays into a strength. And so
Right.
this is where I'd like to hand it over to you to do your thing and run this meeting however you'd like, and I can help you facilitate it.
All right. Did you also want me to talk about how to choose a school? Because you had mentioned that, or are we just going to stick to essay topics today or essay writing?
Yeah, we can do both if you think that we have enough time, but let's do one at a time.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everybody. As Alishir said, I am the director of the college workshop. I have 25 years of experience helping students navigate the United States competitive college application process. And so I have a lot of experience helping students with their essays, and it's always a struggle. I mean, figuring out your topic and all of that. But as you go to apply, you've reached that moment in the process when you have to basically commit yourself to a stack of paper that will express your totality to date. That's a very, very frightening prospect, right? So I know we're focusing on the essay, but I'm wondering what you all know about what goes into a typical college application other than an essay. Anybody know what else goes into an application?
Recommendation letters, transcripts, standardized scores, and extracurricular activities, and so on.
Right. Yeah. So your transcripts, your grades, those are always kind of the critical first thing, right? Why? Because if they don't think you can do the academic work on the campus, they're not going to be interested in the rest of you, right? So you have resume, you have your recommendations, you have your transcript, you have test scores, and then you have the essays. And when I talk about the personal statements, I am referring to what most people think of as the major college application essay. But the reality is that on many applications, you have more than one essay to write, which doesn't make it any less scary. It makes it a lot more scary, right? Okay, so has anybody taken a look at this year's common application prompts? And do you all know what the common application is?
Well, yeah, I looked at it, but they changed one of them this year. Now I don't remember exactly what, but I mean, yeah, there were 7. I think they removed the topic with problem that you have solved, and then they added some minutes, like
gratitude and thankfulness.
Right.
Something
So
like that.
I have the common application prompts here, right? One is some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. Another one is the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you? And what did you learn from the experience? Reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Another one is reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivated you? That's the new question this year. It is a direct outgrowth of the COVID thing. Discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. Describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? And then share an essay on any topic of your choice. So those are the common application prompts. Basically, you can write about anything, right? Topic 7 is an essay on a topic of your choice. So you have all of these potential options, but really, no matter how the question is worded, no matter what the prompt is, all of these essays are essentially asking the same thing. Do you know what that thing is? What are these essays really asking? Anybody?
Who you are.
Who you are.
Who you are. That's exactly it. Who are you? Okay. It doesn't matter what the question is. It's who are you and what unique dimension are you going to add to our campus? What is it about who you are, what you believe that will enrich the lives and minds of your classmates over, say, 15,000 other applicants? Now, does anybody know why they even care and ask these questions in the first place?
Because academics does not show you as a person, how you help others, how you are in a community, what things you have, what things you can help with others doing something, teaching something.
Right. Now,
Even the
go ahead.
also like even these essays sometimes do not show the full character of that person, so that usually the universities do interviews after the application.
Well, that's another topic entirely, because really there's no way anybody can get to know all of you, even if they through the application or through an interview, right? So there are limits to what you can know about another person through a college application or even through an interview. So the point is that you get to choose what you present about yourself, right? You're basically saying through your essays and through your interview and through whatever all else, this is what I want you to know about me, right? Okay, now here in the US, yes, they care, the colleges care about who you are as a person, but there are other countries where the system is completely based on test scores, right? Where college admission is essentially how you place on an exam. In Japan, for example, many colleges, it's a placement test. And you score high enough, you get into that school. But here in the US, in most cases, they want to know more about you. And that's a source of power and frustration, if you think about it, right? I mean, it would be nice if you're a good test taker to be all like, look, I scored really high, I deserve to get into this program, the end, but that's just not how it works here. So you got to play that to your advantage, right? And there are two parts to the story, right? When you look at how an application is set up, we have what I call the numbers. Those are your grades and your test scores. What do those things tell admissions? Just those two things, your grades and your test scores.
Whether you can cope with the program, the syllabus that they're going to offer.
That's pretty much all they can get from it, right? They don't know how smart you are based on your grades, because guess what? Some people are very smart and do very badly in school. Some people are very smart and they're, but they don't work hard. So the transcript doesn't necessarily reflect your work ethic. It basically is the school trying to determine whether or not you can do the work and succeed academically on that campus. But that's all they get from it, which is why they turn to your activities and to your recommendations and to these essays to get some sort of insight into who you are as a person and what you're going to bring to the campus. Because admissions in this country are so selective that they can do that. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of qualified applicants and not enough room for them. So your challenge in writing this essay is how to convey who you are and what sets you apart, right? The difficulty, and it's a very real problem facing you as you sit down to write these most important essays, is that there's no experience in the world that a 17 or 18-year-old could have had that an admissions officer hasn't read about at least 100 times in the course of a single week, right? And while it's likely that admissions doesn't see hundreds of essays from Uzbeks, they do see plenty of essays from a diverse array of international students, as well as from immigrants and minorities, people with all sorts of backgrounds, people with all sorts of accomplishments, people who've escaped war or survived natural disasters, people who've made contributions to science already or made it to the Olympics. Admissions officers have seen it all. And then there's that part of the question that begs you to answer what you've learned from your experience. You have to remember that there's really no philosophical stance that a 17-year-old could have developed that a college admissions officer wouldn't find kind of amusing or laughable. I mean, they have a world-class philosophy department right on their campus, right? And anyway, people usually, except for philosophy majors, don't like to read philosophy. So that's not necessarily a really good way to go about writing your college admissions essay. So that kind of makes things feel depressing. You're like, well, then now what do I do? All right, well, how do you communicate your uniqueness? And despite it all, you are unique. Anybody have any ideas on what we're gonna do about trying to tackle this essay if you can't just try to be like, well, I've done this thing and admissions could never read about it. Like, what are we gonna do? Anybody have ideas on how to deal with this problem?
Being yourself when you're writing about, and before reading the prompt, you need to consider what experience you have already had. What do you want to tell the admission officer or anybody who is reading your essay, so that they can summarize you, they can remember you in a sentence or two.
That's exactly it, right? So you need to be authentic in choosing a topic, right? You want to choose a topic that allows you to convey something meaningful about yourself. A lot of students fall into this trap of talking about something because they think it's unique in some way, all right? But it's not unique. And just picking something because it's different doesn't necessarily mean you're saying something meaningful about who you are, all right? And the other thing that you can do is to say it differently, right? I mean, your story is your story. The details you choose to include, the story you choose to tell in the first place, how you say it, what techniques you use to convey your information, that all makes your essay your own, all right? So think about what makes you who you are. What's important? What are the characteristics that define you? You cannot write your essay before you consider what it is you want to convey about yourself. Your essay is just a vehicle for conveying those things. All right, the topic is meaningless if you don't convey something about yourself that you want admissions to know about you. So I want everybody in this thing, if they're willing to do it, to pick 1 to 2 adjectives, characteristics that they think it's important for admissions to know about them, so that admissions can make a good choice about whether or not to admit you. So in other words, I want you to try to articulate a couple of things about yourself that make you who you are. Like right now, out loud. Anybody willing to do this?
I'm gonna write in the chat.
What was that?
I'm gonna write in the chat.
You're gonna write in a chat, okay. Okay. Now, do you think that if you're, I want you to think about the fact that there are things that are going to appear in your application about you elsewhere, information that's going to appear elsewhere, right? So for example, your personal statement, in your recommendations are probably going to talk about things about how you learn, whether you, what kind of student you are, those kinds of things, right? So your personal statement is an opportunity for you to talk about the things that make you, not necessarily academically, or the things that you value or that are important to you, right? So when you consider writing your personal statement, think about what what you can convey through it that might not come across in any other part of the application. Like your activities say something about you, right? Your recommenders have something to say about you as a student and how you participate in class. But what is it about you? What are the characteristics that you bring that are going to contribute to other people's education? So think about it that way. All right. So I usually, when I work with my students, I have them come up with before they even start writing any essay, come up with a list of adjectives that describe them. All right. And I actually have like a list that I have them reference sometimes, because they sometimes forget like words like creative and energetic and well, I'll tell you one word that's forbidden: compassionate, because everybody uses the word compassionate. But words like that describe who you are fundamentally as a person. Okay, so think about those. Start brainstorming a list of adjectives that describe you. And then as you think about essay topics, which we'll get into a little bit more in a minute, think about what story you can tell about yourself, or what experience you can draw upon that is going to be good for conveying those things about yourself. All right. So the first step in writing your personal statement is to consider who you are as a person, because if you don't know who you are as a person and what admissions should know about you and what you value, then you're going to have a heck of a time writing this essay. All right. The other thing that I want you to consider when you're writing an essay is what needs to happen. Like any college admissions essay needs to do a couple of things. One of those things is to demonstrate that you are capable of being educated, right? And what I mean by that is, does anybody know what the word educated comes from the Latin, which means to lead someone from one place to another? And that is what you're going to college for, right? To get an education, right? So your essay has to demonstrate, not necessarily say outright, that you are capable of change and transformation, that you are capable of being led from one place to another. That's an underlying thing that needs to happen. All right. So the other thing, of course, is that you want to come across as likable. All right. I mean, you can write an essay about how wonderful you are, but if you come across as unlikable, admissions is not going to want you. All right. And that doesn't mean you have to be perfect. All right. So the strongest essays, in my opinion, are essays of transformation, meaning that that demonstrate that you are capable of change. All right. Now, not all personal statements have to be essays of transformation, but I have found that the strongest ones have that element to them, that who you were before you experienced this thing, met this person, read that book, is somehow different and better as a result. All right. So think about the events or experiences in your life that have shaped you and transformed you in ways big and small. Because if you can show that something has transformed you, that shows that you are capable of being educated, that you are educable. All right. Identify the obstacles you have faced. Think about how you overcame them and gained new knowledge and changed as a result. Often, but not always, a personal statement topic is related to one of your extracurricular activities, right? So, I mean, the things that we do in our lives, the activities we choose to do, the interests we pursue are reflective of our values and who we are as people. So often those activities are good sources of personal statement topics, right? Like if you do scientific research because somebody in your family was sick or whatever. There are a million ways we could go with this. But there are times that the topic stems from something that would never appear on your resume. All right, like my personal statement, for example, was about spending a month in a wheelchair after being hit by a car while I was bicycling to school. All right, nowhere on my resume is it going to say spent a month in a wheelchair, right? So other people have written about non-activity related topics such as struggling with their sexuality, being a triplet or a twin, cultural identity. So you're welcome to use the common application prompts or other essay prompts to help you figure out your essay topic. And if it were me, I would start by, as I said, kind of trying to define adjectives, who I am, like that describe me, narrowing it down to the top most important ones, and then thinking about the experiences in my life that I could use to demonstrate that I possess those things. Conversely, or on the other hand, you can think about the experiences you've had in your life that have changed you in some way, whether it's your thinking or the way you go about things or your direction in life, and think about what that transformation says about who you are as a person. I mean, think about what you're conveying through this thing. That's really the fundamental goal. Then and only then can you sit back and really start thinking about how you're going to write the actual essay. If you know topic means you can't even worry about the writing portion of it. And I'm sure all of you are plenty worried about the writing portion of it, right? But the first thing you have to be concerned about is what you're going to say. Once you get to the writing portion of it, it's about, then you have to think about how you're going to say it, how you're going to say it so that it doesn't sound like everybody else's essay, right? So how do you do this? How do you achieve this goal that you're going to have of taking the same old and saying it differently in a way that you're going to emerge from a piece of paper as a three-dimensional personality, that you're going to convey something about yourself to the admissions officer so they walk away and they say, you know, this kid is adaptable and creative and curious, or whatever it is you want to say, right? How do you engage the admissions officer's sensibilities and get them to want to accept you? And I just want to remind y'all that there are actual people reading your application. Like, I think people forget that there are people actually, and they're not that much older than you are, okay? Some of them are probably older, all right? The senior admissions officer, but most of them are 20-something-year-olds who graduated from college not long ago, and they too remember what it was like to be a teenager. So if you can get them to relate to you and see you as a person, and then you're going to come across as likable, and that's half the battle, as we talked about before. Okay, so don't forget that there are actual people reading these essays, and think about what you would like to read. Do you want to read like an essay about, I don't know, black and white symbolism in Othello, where you've written a thesis statement in 5 paragraphs? No. What do you guys like to read?
Somebody that can teach me something.
Okay, so like, do you like fiction, nonfiction, essays, poems? What do you like?
I like life-related scenarios most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
So that I can link them to my own experience and see what the person is saying about.
Okay. All right. And is there a particular style of writing that you like to read better than others? I mean, what's boring and what's interesting when you're reading it? Like, how does an author capture your attention?
Not too much academic words.
No, okay, not too much academic words, right? Okay, so for the purposes of your college application essays, I'm going to say that an effective means of, usually one of the most effective means of communicating something meaningful about yourself is by telling a story about yourself. Okay? Telling stories about oneself tends to yield the most potent, convincing, and compelling essays. All right. This isn't a full story, but think about it this way. If I told you that when I went to Japan for a funeral, I decided to go bungee jumping off of a bridge, that would tell you something about my personality, right? Right? You would think, okay, this person went bungee jumping off of a bridge. She probably is adventurous, right? So think about a story you could tell about yourself that would convey what you want to say about yourself. You don't ever want to say directly, I am adventurous, or I am curious, or I am creative. You want to show the people in admissions that you are creative and or curious or adaptable or whatever it is you're trying to convey. The best writing, in my opinion, definitely for college admissions essays, is to show and not tell. Demonstrate it, prove it to me. Okay? And a story in which you've done this thing, demonstrated that ability or that characteristic, that's going to prove it to me versus, I could sit here and tell you that I'm flexible or that I'm adaptable, but you would have to take my word for it. I haven't shown you that I'm flexible or adaptable. All right. The worst essays are the ones where somebody just makes some sort of statement about themselves without any sort of evidence or proof to back them up. And the worst of the worst are the ones where they say something like, and that shaped me to be the person I am today. Because guess what? I don't know what the person you are today is. That still doesn't define who you are as a person to me. Okay? Now, why are stories so effective? There is actually scientific evidence that stories are effective because our brains are wired for story. They like stories. Did you know that a narrative, that's a story arc with a beginning and a middle and an end, actually causes our brains to release cortisol and oxytocin? Right? Those are the chemicals that are associated with our abilities to connect and empathize and make meaning. So story is literally in our DNA, and our brain is hardwired to respond to stories. But we often don't realize how fundamental storytelling is to the human experience. And storytelling isn't just entertainment. It forces self-reflection. It kind of puts up a mirror to yourself and to culture. It gives you access to yourself. And told well, your story can convey your sense of purpose, identity, or values in a compelling way. All right? So it's not just what we say, meaning the content, that's critical, absolutely, but it is also how you say it, the telling of it. And the task before you is to tell a fact-based story, because it has to be true. You cannot make things up about yourself. To tell a fact-based story in an imaginative way. College essays cannot be fiction, but that doesn't mean that you can't use the same techniques that fiction writers employ to tell a great story. There's an art to this, that of bringing all the strategies of fictional storytelling to narrating real life events, and it's called creative nonfiction. And it is the means by which you use facts, the who, what, where, when, and why of an experience from your life to reveal human truths. That is, what those events mean to you. The wonderful thing about using creative nonfiction as a means of telling your story is that from the same facts, you can tell hundreds of different stories from the same facts. just by deciding what to include and not to include and how you say it. So I have a question for y'all. Do you listen to music? Anybody here like music?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Who doesn't like music, right? What do you listen to?
Openings.
What was that?
Openings of movies.
Okay. What else do people listen to? You
I like
listen
pop.
to radio, Spotify, pop, rock, what?
I like American pop.
You like American pop.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite artist?
It's Calvin Harris. So he's from Great Britain. Yeah.
Yes, well, but you know, all right, Calvin Harris, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Who else listens to music?
I
Nobody
like
listens-
Beethoven. I like Beethoven.
Do you?
Music. Yeah.
Okay. Alishare, what do you listen to?
Yesterday, yesterday I was listening to some Iranian 70s rock music and blues.
Okay.
But I have,
Right.
it's every day something different.
Something different, right? Well, if you listen to music on the radio, you just turn on the radio. Can anybody tell me what most songs are about?
Love.
Love, love, love. 80% of songs are about love, aren't they? Okay. I mean, I always guessed it was 80%. And the other day I was listening to a program on National Public Radio, and sure enough, it's 80%. 80% of songs are about love. Doesn't matter if it's pop or rock or whatever, they're about love. Now, if you think about all of the songs that have ever been written in any language, there are millions and millions of songs about love. And yet we still listen to love songs. Why? Why do we still listen to love songs? You would think, everybody said it. It's been done. Why? So why are we still listening to them?
It's kind of fundamental. I would say admiration or force, but it even in movies it outlaws the physics laws, fundamental physics laws. So my view is like that.
We still listen to love songs because
It unites
there are millions
people.
of different ways to tell them, right? And because there is a fundamental thread of human experience with which we can identify. The reason I bring this up is because we go back to the idea of how difficult it is to be unique in a college admissions essay. But we still listen to love songs because there's always a slightly different way to tell it and a way to get people to identify with it, right? I could write song A and it would be like, I will love you forever and ever in any lifetime, right? And then there's another song where, I hate your guts now. I never want to see you again. I hope you die in a car crash, right? And then there's the ones about lust. And there are a million ways you could go with it, right? And it's the same thing with your college application essay. You get to choose the details. You get to choose the story because everyone has a different perspective. And simply changing the focus of say, an imaginary lens. Let's use a movie reference, right? The shot you take, wide shot, close shot, whatever, changes the whole scene. You get to make those choices, all right? So learning to write creative nonfiction well is all about learning how to find your voice and your perspective on any story you want to write. The great thing about this, guys, is that it's a really fun way to write. You can allow yourself to have some fun with this. You can allow yourself to be creative. You're not boxed in by the traditional academic style writing. You can't just willy-nilly pick things that don't move your story forward. You only have up to 650 words. So but think about it as if you're trying to tell the best short story in the world. If you're into film, think about it as a scene from your life. All right? You can use those metaphors to help you. Okay? So, but of course, as we go back to before you can write anything, before you can write your story well, you have to decide what story you're telling in the first place. So given what you've heard in this lecture, it's time for you to like think and brainstorm about it. And then hopefully that will help you move forward. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
How much time do we need to take to write a good personal statement? What do you think?
Personal statements take time, okay? And how much time they take depends on the kind of writer you are and how much difficulty you even have coming up with the topic. The students with whom I work here, it takes a while, but there's no set formula. But you should be thinking about it now. You absolutely should be thinking about it now. I will have my students, the ones I'm working with, my what I call my rising seniors, kids who are about to apply to college. I will start working with them on their essays in August. But the reason we wait till August is that, at least here, most of the time they're doing something over the summer that might influence what their personal statement topic ends up being. Right? So I have a kid here who's going to go to Costa Rica for a week. It's possible that that will become the topic of her personal statement. It's also possible it won't. So set aside plenty of time, because this essay matters. All right, it's critical and it's worth the time, but I don't have a flat out like, it's going to take you 5 hours. Right? I wish I could tell you. But, you know, student A here might take 10 hours and student B, it might take 25. I mean, and you're going to want to write drafts and experiment. The key to successful writing is to take, first of all, you need to articulate the concept you were trying to say in the first place. And it doesn't even matter if it's said well. You just have to get the idea out. It's what I call a concept sentence. All right, so let's say that the concept sentence that you're trying to convey in your essay is, I was nervous. Okay, I was nervous. That's not a terribly exciting sentence. I mean, it's fine, but it's not a great, you know, in writing, there are a million ways to express the same idea. What might be a more interesting or more show not tell way of conveying that someone is nervous? Anybody?
Can I say?
Hmm?
I want to say it not from my own perspective, so I'm gonna use he or she.
That's fine.
He was staying out near the doorsteps of the house where his legs were shaking, and he couldn't see how to enter the house, even though seeing through knowing where the key is.
Right. Okay. So you used storytelling, right? You set a scene and you put somebody there, right? Now, if you were trying to convey that that character was nervous, right? One way you could do that is to say something like about, I think you said shaking, right? Right.
Yeah.
One of the, how do we manifest being nervous? Sometimes it's your hand, you shake or you sweat, right? So if I wanted to say in my essay, maybe I was nervous, I might say, my hand shook and sweat pooled in the small of my back, right? That puts it in my body. Like if I'm an admissions officer, I don't just think you're nervous. I can see that you're nervous. I feel that you're nervous. Now, somebody asked here that the essay was full, like essays were full of sentences that are too complicated, and you need to write in the same way. It's not about whether your sentences are complicated or simple. You want to choose the best sentence to convey your idea. I'm not into complicated sentences for the sake of being complicated. Like, to me, that doesn't show that you're smart. All right. You're trying to communicate. All right. And of course, English isn't your first language, right? So you're not held to the same standards in that regard, meaning they're not expecting you to write like Shakespeare. Okay. However, you are expected to demonstrate competency in the language, because guess what? You're going to be using English on the campus, and you're going to need to be writing in English. And so you really do want to try to make sure that your essay is as grammatically correct as you can make it. Okay. To me, as a reader, it's distracting if things are just wrong. If you put commas in the wrong place, if you use absolutely the wrong word, like not even close kind of thing, right? But you're going to get a little bit of flexibility because they understand that you're not native English speakers. So it's okay if you're not writing, you know, Shakespearean sonnets here. What really matters is that you pick the language that helps you convey to admissions what you need them to understand about you. You don't need to be pretentious about it. You don't need to go to the thesaurus and pick the most complicated word. You can stick, I mean, the thing about narrative writing too is the sentences don't have to be complicated. You can use dialogue to convey an idea, right? So I hope that answers that question. Anybody else? Questions about this process?
Do you? I have watched. Well, I'm a YouTube lover, especially TED videos. Because as you say, they use story to give an idea or concept so that you remember it for more longer time. And what kind of sources do you recommend us for improving our creative nonfiction writing?
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. This was what I was going to ask also. Like prior to that time, by August, what can we do to improve our writing?
Well, that's a really good question. One of the things you can do is read some stories, short stories, for example, right? Like see how authors do it. What techniques did they use? So you read either novels or you read short stories to get a sense of how those folks are framing their narratives. All right. Another thing is that you can also read memoir. Memoir is a nonfiction genre, right, in which somebody reflects upon his or her life, and you can kind of see what they're saying about it. But improving writing really means actually practicing it. It means sitting down and saying, guess what, today I'm going to try to tell a story about me. And you're going to pick an experience from your life. It doesn't even have to be a meaningful experience. It doesn't have to be like the profound, oh my God, you know, this is this changed my life thing. But like, think about how you could tell a story about yourself better. You sit around with your friends at the lunch table, right? And you tell stories from your day. Okay. Think about what would happen if you practiced for that. Like if you're like, okay, I'm going to tell this story about how I did this thing. What could I do to make it more interesting to my friends? It's a little different because in writing, you can do things that you don't normally do in conversation, but you can still draw upon sort of how you talk to your friends about things. Like you ever say, and he said this, and then I said that, right? You can do that's dialogue. That translates to the page as dialogue. So what I would do is start writing little stories about myself. They don't even have to have a point necessarily. You just, okay, this event happened in my day. How would I tell somebody else about it in an interesting way? And that way you have to work with the facts, like this is what actually happened, so it has to be true. And then you think about, well, what details can I leave out because they just don't matter? And what details could I include that make it more interesting and bring it to life for the person? Practice, practice, practice. You have to be willing to experiment. That's what I was saying with the concept sentence. I was nervous. Like you pick a sentence like that, and then you give yourself the assignment. What are 5 different ways I could say that would be more interesting?
Can I ask a question of the group? So if you raise your hand, if you're on video, or just click the emoji to raise your hand. And here's the question. The question is, how many of you keep a journal? How many of you write in a journal? Like a personal diary type journal?
I'm not consistent enough, but when some kind of event happens that that I want to remember about, so that the morning that I get up, I don't remember that. I write down those events.
Okay.
Yeah,
How many people have not written anything in their journal in the last 2 weeks? So you can put like an X, like that red emoji that I just used. If you haven't written anything in a personal about yourself in the last 2 weeks, put the X there.
Like I usually write my thoughts and my reaction to the, let's say, event happening in my life, just to put, so that after that I will be able to look back and like see what I thought would be right at that time.
A journal is a good way of finding material, and also and of helping you work through thoughts that might develop into an essay, actually.
But as time passes, I realized that that was not worth taking into consideration. I mean, maybe I look at it from another point of view, and I say, that was funny me. How come I could do that, or something like that.
The reason I asked this question is because of Eden, of what you said, which is practice. So many of you guys here spend probably like 30 minutes every day solving math problems or solving your physics problems, right? Like, raise your hand if you spend like an hour in the last 2 weeks solving math problems for homework. Raise your hand, put a check mark. If you didn't do any math in the last 2 weeks, can you put an X like you did previously, like this? So no math in the last 2 weeks at all. Oh, there is one person. Okay, but like most people have, right? Most of you guys are practicing because you want to get better at math. You see my point, right? And Eden's point, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to do if you don't have some sort of set goal. Like if you want to get a good grade in math, you do your math homework. This feels like, well, it's what is going to motivate me to do it. But think about it, like this is critical to reaching your bigger goal. So it's worth taking the time to practice at it. And you only get better at something if you put time and effort into trying it. You look at how somebody else did it, like, oh, I think this person wrote a really good story. And then you need to try it yourself. Concept sentence, then try to figure out a better way to say that sentence, then move on to the next sentence, and you do that thing until you've developed a story or an interesting way of an anecdote, something that right. But it is practice, and Alice shared, journals, that forces you to write out at least your thoughts and your reactions to things, which is an important part of any good reflective personal statement, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just I see these questions, and I've seen this question pop up from somebody else in the last session. Like, I watched a video on YouTube when I was researching writing essays, and I'm like, stop watching other people's videos.
It's true.
Guys, like, you have to write your own thing. And so stop watching what other people wrote. It's not going to help you. I mean, it's helpful to understand some basics, right? What is the goal of the personal essay? But if you're spending your time watching other people doing things, it's like sitting in front of your TV watching the Olympics. Do you think you're going to get better at running the marathon if you're just watching the marathon on the Olympics? No. So start training for it.
But you can learn from the mistakes of that person running the marathon, as I said, and try to not repeat that yourself.
As long as you do exercise.
right? As long as you do exercise.
Exactly. You can be like, oh, look at his poor technique. I could have done that so much better. It's like lying down on your couch. Oh my God, his skiing is terrible. He only did 90 meters on the long jump. I could have easily done 150.
Those YouTube videos are a source of a little bit of frustration for me, because people then seem to think that there's only one right way to do things, or they take the thing out of context. So for example, every year here in the States, there'll be an article about, this is the essay that got this kid into all of the Ivy League schools. And it makes me just roll my eyes so hard, because that essay was not in a vacuum, right? That kid had a resume and grades and test scores and recommendations and everything else, but this is the essay that did it. It doesn't work that way. Your essay is not in a vacuum. And what worked for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another person. So you got to be you. You got to think about who you are. You got to think about what you want to convey, and not worry so much about what so-and-so did that was successful or unsuccessful, because it's an entire picture. It's not just that one little piece.
Yeah, maybe we should pause, and I know that we're at the hour. I don't know how much time you have. If you're happy to keep going,
yeah, we can keep
happy
going.
to keep going and maybe touch on the second topic. So let's pause here. Let's maybe take 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll switch to the college list topic.
Okay, as long as people's heads haven't exploded and they're not feeling too overwhelmed. I'm gonna stretch.
So sounds good. So who's got their hand up? Faris, you have a hand up. Go ahead.
So mainly what I got from this session was that we should tell a story and our personal statement, and which basically means we don't have to connect some of the extracurriculars into a personal statement. Yeah, for example, we can connect them into other essays or supplementals if there are. Am I right?
Yeah, okay, so your personal statement, you only get 650 words. And it is not the place to simply list your activities or try to talk about all of your activities. It has to be a very focused, very specific thing, right? It could be about one of your activities or some theme that underlies your activities, but it's not the place to just spout your accomplishments or regurgitate your resume, okay? You're going to have the opportunity to talk about your activities in the activities section, like either on the common application, there's that obnoxious little chart. Some schools allow you to upload a full resume. There's the additional information section if the chart doesn't allow you to give enough detail about your activities, right? So your personal statement is, again, it's about conveying something meaningful about yourself, and that might be rooted in an activity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And it's not the place to just go back over everything you've ever done or accomplished. There are other places for that. I mean, think about the application as a whole and what other information is going to go in where, so that you can use your personal statement effectively. It's also true that there may be supplemental essays that ask specific questions, either related to your activities or to why you want to pursue a particular major or why you want to attend a particular institution. Where it gets complicated is that school A may not have any additional essays, but school B might have several additional essays. So you don't always know what you're going to be able to write in detail about, but you do know that at least if you're applying to a common application school, you have a personal statement, one major essay, and then there are potentially other essays that could address other things in the application. I will say that not every school in the US is on the Common Application. And that means that most schools will allow you to submit the personal statement. But if you were to apply to, say, the University of California system, University of California, Santa Barbara, University of California, Berkeley, University of California, Los Angeles, those schools, that application is its own application. And you have to answer, and doesn't take a personal statement. It has 4 350-word essays and of differing topics, but the underlying principle is still the same. Through each of those essays, you're still trying to convey something meaningful about yourself.
Yeah,
That's where things get a little complicated.
just to
I
give
hope that helps answer your question, though.
I can give an example of an essay that I saw from a student. So the student had a speech impediment. And of course, he didn't list that on a resume. Like, you wouldn't say,
Right.
I have a speech impediment as a thing on your resume, and it doesn't come up anywhere normally, right? And so when he talked about in his essay why he got involved in TED, like student TED club, where you stand up on stage and you do the TED Talks in front of people, public speaking.
Yes.
He didn't talk about his achievements in public speaking. He put the context around why he was doing it. Right?
Exactly.
He started with a speech impediment, and like he told his story like from childhood, which was like a pretty crappy experience because people mocked him. And then he talked about his transformation from like being that person as a kid to what he has been able to become by persevering and like practicing public speaking and being able to stand up in front of, I don't know, 50 people or something, he wrote, and deliver a presentation. So
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good example of how sometimes something in your life is the motivating force for why you do some activity, right? And I'm in for the essay, I'm interested in the motivating force and not what you've necessarily accomplished. I'm interested in why you do it and how it's changed or transformed you. And in this case, right, the speech impediment was a fundamental aspect of who he was and drove him to do certain things. And so then I feel like I walk away from that essay knowing that student better, and I'm likely to think, oh, you know, this kid perseveres and is tenacious and like all of those qualities that I'm looking for about you that he never had to say outright because he showed them, right?
Akbarbek, Husnedin, you had a question?
Is it time for off-topic questions apart from writing or not?
I'm open to any
Sure.
questions at this point.
Oh, okay. Like these days, like I'm really considerate about safety where I go. So like I need someone from the US and from the experience of living there for many years to like the situation there. Like, is it the situation for international students? How is that? And all these cases now in US. Like I heard there was a shooting in 12 states recently.
Well, I will say this. We do not live our lives like we're under fire all the time. You know, this place is not a war zone. There are these incidents. They are very disturbing. However, I would say that as we talk about how you choose a school, you might want to consider where that school is and what the environment is like for international students. But there's no uniform like, oh, it's like this everywhere here in the United States. All right. We do have some issues around rising hate crimes against Asian Americans. We got rising crimes against Jews, but it's not like everybody's constantly walking around, whatever. So the United States is, in my opinion, no more dangerous than some other places. We just have different dangers. And you hear about, of course, all of the horrible things that happen here and not all the things that happen on a daily basis. But it would be like assuming that life in Israel and Gaza is constantly a war zone, because that's all we ever hear is when things go wrong. That being said, I think it's legitimate to be concerned about safety and about where you could go that would be more likely to be open-minded. I mean, I certainly wouldn't necessarily want to send certain students of certain backgrounds to certain places in the US. It just would not be smart, okay? I mean, there are places in the US that are more tolerant and more cosmopolitan and more welcoming of international students, or of Muslims or of Jews or of Asians than there are in other places. And that's part of the consideration when you choose a school.
I thought this was a question about safety schools, and I was like, what a great segue into our second topic.
Thank you.
But speaking about choosing school, so first of all, I would like to ask you all a question. What is your goal in choosing a school? Like, what's your ultimate goal in choosing a college?
Getting full financial aid.
Ah, okay. Is that the ultimate goal?
The thing is, it's hard for me to raise money for higher education, because my parents haven't had higher education. They have completed high school, and apart from money section, I want to study where mathematics and relative science are taught very well, because I want to learn from the professionals themselves, seeing how they do it.
Okay, so there are a lot of factors that go into choosing a school, right? But your overall goal is to attend a college that truly meets your needs and requirements and provides the environment that's most conducive to your success, right? So there are a bunch of criteria that you have to consider when you're choosing the school. And so, right, to picking a college that truly meets your needs, right? And one of those, the major one, is going to be money or finances, okay? Like, if there's not enough money to attend the school, nothing else about the institution is going to matter, right? So first things first, finances. I'm sure Alisher has spoken to you about the fact that there are certain colleges in this country that are more likely to fully fund international students, and that you're going to need to limit your list to those colleges, right? Has that been a discussion amongst all of you?
Yes.
Okay.
We had.
Okay. So he can help guide you in terms of that. The issue, of course, is that financial aid policies at institutions are not consistent and can change from year to year. So that means you have to do your research carefully and make sure that the schools to which you're applying could potentially provide you the funds that you need to make it possible. All right, but once you get past money, what else might you want to consider in selecting a school? Because there's still going to be a lot of options. How do you know what's right for you? So anybody have any?
The background of the university, the students, the academics, and how the university fits you. I mean, from the both views, academically and environmentally, like the weather or these kind of things.
Right. Okay. So there are a couple of things that you brought up right there. So first of all, geographic location can be a major factor. Some people, it could be more of a factor than others. So, but that means kind of identifying the most suitable general physical environment, right? So if you're a type of person who is going to be absolutely miserable, if you're cold all the time, or if it rains all the time, then you might not want to choose a school where it's cold all the time or it rains all the time. All right. Now, if you think I wouldn't necessarily like it, but I can handle it, that's one thing. But if you know you're going to be absolutely miserable, that's another thing. Okay, so you definitely want to take into consideration geography because that can help you narrow things down. Absolutely. I mean, especially if you're working with a large list. Like, let's say by some chance there are 200 possible institutions that where you could get the money you need to go. Well, that you're not going to apply to 200 schools. Okay, that's crazy. All right, you need to narrow it down. So geographic location is a good way of doing that. But of course, you need to ask yourself some questions so that you can determine what a suitable geographic location is. Questions like, how do I do with the cold? How do I do with the rain? How do I do with the heat? You know, do I need mountains nearby? Do I need an ocean nearby? Do I not need an ocean nearby? How would I feel about being somewhere where everything is absolutely flat? Like, how does, and whether or not how relevant that is, right? I mean, for some people, it's not a big deal. Like, oh, you know, they can deal with whatever. And for some people, it really is a factor. Like, they cannot handle it. I have a student this year who's like, I cannot go where it's cold. I'm miserable when it's cold. I get depressed when it's cold. I can't function when it's cold. I mean, because I come from a place where the temperature today is going to be probably 38 degrees Celsius. And I think it's pretty warm where you guys are at too. Right? Okay, so geography for sure. Okay. And what's another factor would be, of course, academics. Now, when the schools you're going to be looking at are probably all going to be pretty decent academically. So, but you really need to dig into their programs and see if they have what they need, what you need from them. Right? So especially if you think you're going to major in something unusual, right? I mean, say, I don't know, aerospace engineering. Aerospace engineering is not offered at that many schools, okay? But math is offered pretty much everywhere. Psychology is offered pretty much everywhere. If you have an unusual major, that can be a big factor. But even so, if you're pretty certain about what you're going to major in, you definitely want to take the time to look at the academic program in that particular major and make sure that it looks interesting to you and that the way they're teaching it or their approach to teaching or the classes that they offer appeal to you. So absolutely. All right. And there are other factors to academic compatibility. For example, at some places, there are going to be required classes you need to take. That's called a core curriculum. Or there might be distribution requirements, which are again a series of required classes, but with a little bit more flexibility. I mean, other places might have a quarter system versus a semester system. How do you feel about those things? How will they impact your education? So those are all things you might want to take into consideration in terms of academic compatibility. All right. Another factor you're going to want to look at is setting. And by setting, I mean the most suitable specific physical environment like city or suburb or rural, right? I mean, some of these schools, let's take a school like NYU, New York University. That school is in the city. It doesn't even have a defined campus, right? You could walk down a city street and the only reason you'd know that you were at NYU is because the building says NYU. Otherwise, it just looks like any other city street. Yet in New York City also is Columbia University, and Columbia has a defined campus, but surrounded by the city, right? Think about, that's what I mean by setting. Are we looking at city, suburb? Do you want a defined campus? Are you okay if it doesn't really have a campus? What are the advantages and disadvantages of those kinds of locations? Some people absolutely do not want to be in the middle of a big city. It's too overwhelming. Some people do not want to be out in the middle of nowhere in the country. Where are you going to thrive? Where are you going to get what you need to be successful? All right. So then there's just overall size of the school. All right. Because the size of a school, and by this I mean the number of students there, can very much impact your entire experience. Right? So can anybody tell me or have ideas about some of the advantages or disadvantages to going to a big versus a small school?
Big schools, though they have many students, you are not going to spend time with all of the students. You're going to be knowing some proportion of people. Though since you might think it's better to choose greater size school because you can easily develop your networking, but it's not all the true. And another disadvantage of that is it's going to be crowded. I mean, the services that, for example, that you want to have might be engaged when you want to have when you want them to be for you, like libraries, cafeteria, or something like that if it has a campus. And another advantage that I would say for smaller school is that you are gonna know pretty much everyone, and since you're gonna meet them more often, it helps you set out relationships with others so that you can know much more about their personalities and what they like, what their interests are, and you can share with them your insights, and they can share with you the insights. And the only thing that since we study at small size school, only 168 students for school. From my experience, I can say that sometimes it may become boring because
that's very, very small.
You're gonna be seeing all the time the same people, the same faces. You may not remember what it was like outside of the school.
You make a lot of very good points. Okay, I mean, big schools, often your introductory classes are large. The student to faculty ratio, or the size of your classes, how much personal attention you get can be impacted by the size of the school. And it is true that even though there are a lot of people there are only so many people you can actually get to know, right? But some of the advantages of bigger schools are that they have a wider range of majors usually, that they have often some resources that small schools may not have, like the ability, like research labs. I mean, like at a certain level, I mean, all faculty tend to do research, but they may have physical resources and facilities that some smaller schools do not have. There's a lot that can be said about the influence of size on your education. Smaller schools may not have as many majors, but you're more likely to get the personal attention and get to know people. I went to a college that was 1,200 students. That's considered very small here in the United States. It was smaller than my high school. I loved it. It was the right environment for me. I did not know everybody on the campus, but my dean knew who I was. The president of the university knew who I was. If anything went wrong, I could talk directly to my professor. I had that person's home telephone number. All right. So everybody's going to be different, and there are pros and cons to each style of school, small versus large. And you also got to think about who you are and what you're used to, and whether going from a school of, say, 168 people to a school of 55,000 people is going to be overwhelming. Here in the US, a lot of people who go to large schools end up joining fraternities and sororities because they're trying to make it smaller because it's too overwhelming. But again, you go back to the idea that at a larger school, you have the potential for a wider range of majors and some access to facilities that you may not have at a smaller school. So you're definitely going to want to take a look at that and think about what you need. Do you need personal attention? Do you want to know most of the people on your campus? Those kinds of questions. Again, it's all about self-analysis and self-assessment in terms of your own needs and wants. Okay. Anybody have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to just add one more thing to the previous point about academics, which is in part, this is about looking for schools that offer something that is in line with what you're interested in. But also the other part of this is how you're going to present yourself to that that university, because a smaller school typically has to differentiate itself somehow. It has to like say, well, we're small, but we have this really cool program that we are really invested in. And so, of course, then the fit matters a lot more than if you're applying to a university that has 10,000 students and basically every major that you can think of, then like doesn't really matter. On the other hand, if you're applying, for example, for a popular major, like not a major, but like in your application, you talk about how you are dead set on being a mathematician, right? And you apply to MIT. It's like, well, duh, like you
Yeah.
apply to MIT, so how are you different? Like there's thousands over there queuing up for the same exact reasons that you are. And so if you tell them, oh, I want to learn from the best at MIT, they're like, duh, that's not really positioning yourself very well, right? So as part of your research into what these schools have to offer, you're not just looking for what is a good fit for you, you're also researching to make sure that you are positioning yourself in your application in the best possible way for each one of those schools. And if you don't have an answer for like why you are a good fit for MIT, not why MIT is a good fit for you, like that's obvious, but if you don't have a good answer why MIT should want you, then your application is going to be weak.
Yeah.
So that's another reason to put time into research.
Yeah. I mean, I really believe that it is about making a good match between you and the school. Okay, because if you get into a great school, that's all well and good, but if you're miserable there, that's not so well and good. So you definitely want to make sure that you take a look at these schools in terms of your own needs and wants, but also in terms of the reality of, all right, everybody who applies to MIT is likely to want to go into a STEM field. I had this issue with a student who applied to the Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins is probably best known for being for its pre-medical, and everybody who goes there seems to want to be in pre-med. Well, it has outstanding other programs too, and this kid didn't want to be pre-med. She wanted to be art history, and guess what? Johns Hopkins grabbed her because they needed people who are art history. Okay, I mean, finally somebody who's not pre-med. Okay, so use sequentially kind of each of these criterion: geographic location, setting, size, all that kind of stuff should narrow your list down. All right, determining these things take into account your learning needs, your personal motivation, the degree of independence, your social needs. Like that's a big thing too. The social environment and sort of philosophical, religious environment, and your intellectual compatibility is also a factor here. These are all things you need to consider as you research these schools. Anybody have anything to add before I talk about how you research schools? We're good? Okay, so I just talked to you about how like you need to take all of these things into account, but then the question is, how do you find this information, right? Like where do you start? Okay, there are lots of resources out there, and some of them are better than others. My first thing that I would say is that you start with the college's own websites. That's the horse's mouth, as we say here, meaning that's firsthand information where you're most likely to get accurate information. That being said, a lot of the verbiage on those websites is very slick advertising. It's like, hey, apply to me. We have this, we have that, we have the other thing. So you kind of have to delve through it. What I have my students do here is go to the websites and then start to print out the information from the websites about the things that they're interested in. So things about their specific academic program, or about campus life, or about extracurriculars, or whatever it happens to be. And then I have them use what I call the 3 highlighter method of college research, which is to pick a color highlighter for the things that they like as they read, pick a color highlighter for the things that they don't like. Like say they have to take 4 years of foreign language and they really hate taking foreign language. They would highlight that in the color that they don't like, and then a color for the things that they have questions about that they need to follow up on. And generally speaking, if most of the things you've highlighted are in the color you like, that's probably going to make the next round of research. Right? Whereas if something's highlighted in a bunch of the color that you don't like, that's probably not going to make the next. All right. So if you have the possibility to do that, you could do that. If you're not a kind of like print out and highlight person, you can certainly copy and paste from their website's information and highlight in like Google Docs or Microsoft Word or however you need to work. But you do have to read what the colleges are saying about themselves. And of course, when they make claims about intangible things like our teachers are fabulous, you're going to want to dig deeper and look for evidence that their teachers really are fabulous. Okay, right? Because that's slick advertising. Only after you've read what the colleges have to say about themselves would I start to look at other sources of information. Here, people tend to look at US News and World Report, which is a ranking system. I hate that. I think it's terrible. I don't think it helps you. So I would stay away from that. There are
They
these
throw
college
away
guidebooks, like the Fisk Guide to the Colleges, like looks like this. I'm not a big fan because they can be helpful to some degree, but you have to know how to read them because it's not necessarily the most reliable source of information. It takes a bunch of people's opinions and kind of melds them into this one thing, and in the end, it makes every college sound good. And just because a student, like one of the entries might say, students at our school work very, very hard, that might be true, but maybe what they find hard isn't what you find hard. So it's not always the best way to go about this. That doesn't mean they don't have their place, but always start with the college's own information. Other things that you can do, of course, is to talk to representatives of the school and ask them questions, right? I mean, they're the ones who should know their departments, where you can ask follow-up questions. You sometimes might want to talk to current students if you have questions about things that are a little less tangible. For example, if you're concerned about the environment for international students on a given campus and safety, then I would definitely talk to some other international students on that campus and ask them about their experiences. Now, that's just their experiences, but that's better than having nobody's experiences to look at, okay? So current students and faculty can be a very good source of information. Former students, you can ask them questions, but you're better off talking to current students because they're gonna know what's happening on campus now. And that means you can reach out through social media if you have it. You can contact the admissions office and ask to talk to students. They will be happy to put you in touch with students. They have people who are ambassadors for the school. They're always going to have positive things to say about the school because that's what they're hired to do. But at least it's a starting point for getting some of the information that you need. Questions?
Okay.
Not related for this subject, but I was going to ask you a specific question. Like, I like reading books, so won't it be too basic to include it on Common App? Or if it is, how can I turn it into more impressive extracurricular activity on Common App?
Oh, okay. So you like to read and you're wondering if that has a place on the Common application or in your activities.
Yeah, it's one of my major activities. Probably it takes most of my time. Yeah.
So I have no problem when students have a major hobby in which they invest a lot of time in having that person included on their resume or in the extracurricular activities section, right? I would want you to be specific about kind of the types of things you like to read, right? Like in a resume, you stick to very concrete facts, right? Like you talk about that if you raised money for this particular cause by doing this particular thing. It's like very concrete. It's not it's not the philosophical stuff. It's not the why you do it. It's simply what you've done and what you've accomplished, right? That's what a resume does. So if you were going to put reading on your resume, it would be, you would probably talk about the types of books you read and your interests, right? Potentially you could end up talking about it in an essay, like a personal statement, if there's some aspect of it that is transformative, that has changed you, that speaks to your personality. But you wouldn't want to just do it like, you know, I like to read books and here's why, right? I would want some sort of insight into what that does for you, how it's changed you. I might pick a specific book and talk about how that book has influenced you and changed you, right? So there are tons of possibilities there.
There's also something you guys have to understand about American culture. Americans are intense about everything. So if an American decides to pick up a hobby, they go really, really hard at that hobby. Like they buy all the most expensive professional gear to start cycling, even if they are just a beginner cycler, right? So because Americans like to do everything with intensity. I'm generalizing here, but my point is that imagine if instead of reading, your hobby was playing games, right? Computer games, video games. Some people spend so some people spend a lot of hours playing computer games. But when do you think it's appropriate to say that in your college application? And it's not that different from reading. So think about why would you pick playing computer games as something to talk about potentially in your application? What would be some reasons?
When I have accomplished something in that game, probably.
Like accomplished what?
Like won some title or.
Okay, so competing professionally, right? Rather than just playing at home. So how does that translate to reading? Can you think of similarities there? Like there's no professional reading competitions, right? I don't think. But what could be a parallel?
Getting to know the idea in a book that you haven't had idea about it yet before. For example, if you're reading something written in the past, I mean a century ago, or something like that, and you're gonna have an idea about people's thoughts and minds, insights at that time, and it would give much more interest, much more insight on how it was like before then.
It can be debate, or I don't know, maybe writing my own book.
Okay, yeah. So I'm more with you than with Mohammad Reza on this, because your point, Mohammad Reza, is just like the benefit you're getting from reading the book, which with playing games, I'm also getting some benefit, right? I'm getting pleasure from it, but that's not really something that you can write well about. But if reading books drove you towards like creating a book club at your school or organizing some debates at your school and doing something about it that is not just benefiting you, but maybe benefiting people around you, your community, your school, then that becomes potential ground for talking about it. But I think just saying, hey, I'm reading for 5 hours a day is probably like, for Americans who love that intensity, they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I'm going cycling 5 hours a day, so what's the big deal? So you have to contextualize it.
But you would put like cycling on your resume, right? You would put cycling 5 hours a day. You might not write an essay about it, but you might put it on your resume, right? Because that's an indication of how you spend your time and where your interests are. But when you talk about like writing an essay in particular, there's that, think about it this way. What is the result of what you're doing? Meaning, how did it lead you to do something differently? Right? That's the transformative aspect of it. If you were going to talk about, I don't know, reading and how it changed your life, I would want to see some sort of tangible change in your life, if that makes sense. Yeah, evidence that you did something with it, right? Like, all right, the story of how reading this particular book led a young man to do what specifically, right? it's when something changes our thinking or our perspective, we tend to change our behavior as well. And I'm looking for that concrete evidence that something has resulted from it, that you do something differently or do something new or have taken a different path, and because you did this thing in the first place, you encountered this idea, read this book, did this, whatever it was. You're always like, doing this led to this concrete outcome.
Impact.
Then it has a place.
Okay, I want to do a time check. We've been at this for an hour and a half. I know
That's
some of
not
you.
everybody's limit mentally. I've discovered with my students, that's usually what the length of my appointments with students, because I figure that's the end of their brain power.
Yeah, and I know some of the folks already had to drop off to not miss their dinner, and I think some of you might have only 20 minutes left to get your dinners. So I guess let's finish it up here with maybe like one last question or parting thoughts. Does anybody have anything they want to say? Or Eden, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I just want you to know that it was a pleasure to be able to talk with you all, and that if you have follow-up questions, Alishir has my information, and I'd be happy to answer emails or speak to you again.
Well, it was very informative and very great session. So thank you so much, Ms. Eden. We appreciate it. It means a lot for us all. And Mr. Alishir, to you too. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Eden. Bye, everyone.
We'll talk later.